Hi everyone, my name's Alexa, and just a few short weeks ago, my med school application process finally ended. It was a very long road, but now that I finally know where I'm going, I wanted to share with you guys a few things that I learned through my experiences. First, I want to give just a little bit of background info on me. So I applied during the 2020 application cycle, meaning that I will be matriculating or actually starting medical school in the fall of 2020. Just to give you guys a general timeline for that, the application opened back in June of 2019, and then I officially knew where I was going in December 2019. So that encompasses like filling out the primary application, sending it all my secondaries, and then doing my interviews and hearing back from the schools. Okay. So here are my top 5 tips for getting into medical school. This one was really big for me. I bugged the absolute crap out of my pre-med advisor. He knew me extremely well by the time this process was over. So I would highly recommend setting up an appointment with your advisor as soon as you can, just to get like on a first name basis with them and so that they can understand like who you are as an applicant as soon as possible. The 2 main things that I got from meeting with my counselor were information about the letter of recommendation process and information about my transcripts. You may or may not know this, but the process for submitting letters of recommendation is actually kind of tricky. So you don't submit them directly to the application service. You have your letter writer come up with a letter, then they usually submit it to your school, like your undergraduate school, and they actually sponsor the letter. And I'll talk more in a later video about what that means. But basically it just means that your school is like supporting your application. And so then from there, your school is actually the one that sends it off to the application service. And so there's a lot of deadlines and requirements that go along with, submitting all of your documentation correctly for that. And my pre-med advisor was a huge help in figuring all that out. And then the other thing that my pre-med advisor was able to help me with was pairing up my transcripts to the med school required, to the med school prereq classes. So basically, in order to get into medical school, there's a list of classes that you have to take. And this can be classes you've already taken, these can be classes you're in now, or that you're going to take later before you graduate, is just as long as you actually take them at some point before you matriculate. So my pre-med advisor was a really good resource for figuring out which courses I had on my transcript actually correlated with those med school requirements. Okay, so tip number 2 is MSAR. This is literally the coolest resource I came across during my application process. And MSAR stands for Medical School Application Requirements, and it is literally just how it sounds. It is all of the statistics for like every medical school registered with AMCAS. And basically it has everything from like median MCAT scores of their admitted class to like median GPAs and a breakdown of like gender and race and age and how many students are coming from all these different states. It is a gold mine of information, because the last thing that you want to do is waste your time and your energy and your money on applying to schools that you really have little to no chance of getting into simply because of basic reasons like demographics or what state you live in or your GPA, like things like that like pretty much aren't going to change throughout the application process. If you don't meet those general requirements, you just don't even want to spend time filling out an application for that school. So MSAR was super helpful to me when it came to narrowing down my list of schools that I was actually going to send my application to. And just so you know, it does cost $28, and that is like a year-long subscription, so you can access this information anytime after, like a year after you pay for it. And for the record, I did not take finances lightly throughout this process. I was paying for almost the entirety of my application on my own, like through my part-time jobs. So finances were a really big deal. I don't just throw around expenses, but in this case, this was definitely something worth spending money on. Okay, so that kind of leads me into my third point, which is essentially be careful about applying to out-of-state public schools. Now, I'm not saying not do it. I'm just saying, again, like double check on MSAR or some other resource before you actually do, because a lot of times a public school in a state other than the one that you live in is going to have a really, really low acceptance rate for out-of-state students. And the reason for that is basically if it's a state school, it's state funded, so the money that they're spending to train you as a doctor, they want that money to kind of be an investment back into their state. They want you to set your practice up in their state. So if you're already living somewhere else, then the odds of you staying there to practice are kind of small. So it makes sense, but just double check before you come up with your short list and look at what the percentages are for out-of-state students for that school. Okay, tip number 4, and this was probably the biggest regret that I have for my application, is do not get burnt out on your primaries, because secondaries are still to come and they are, in my opinion, much worse. Doable, but worse, and I'll tell you why. So basically, your primary application is very similar to the Common App, which I'm sure a lot of you probably submitted when you were applying to college. So it's like you fill out one general application, and then you can go down a checklist and add the schools that you want to send your application to. So it's like you only fill out the application once, and then it gets sent out to all your schools. Okay, so that's primary applications. Over here we have secondary applications, and those are completely different. So those are one application per school. Now, the secondaries have some general parts like your demographic information and contact info, and then they'll usually ask you to list out your whole transcript. So like by hand, you have to manually go in and input all the classes you've taken, which is pretty tedious, but like definitely doable. Definitely the big part on your secondary is the essays. So most schools, I think the ones I applied to anyway, probably averaged like 4 essays per school. And the issue with this is that they're different for each school. So it's not like the same kind of generic essay questions for each school. Some of them actually got very specific. And so it is very easy to lose all of your energy after like submitting 2 or 3 of those and just be like, okay, I can't do this anymore, like I just want to be done. So my advice to avoid that would be pace yourself on your primary application, because basically what I did, or the mistake I made, was I obsessed over like every little detail in my primary. And I'm not saying like don't pay attention and don't be meticulous, but like the really important essays, the ones that you really have to write well, are in your secondaries. And if you spend like weeks on your primary like I did, you will not have any mental stamina left to fill out your secondaries. So definitely pay attention to that. Also, this is more my opinion, but keep in mind that the number of schools you're sending your primary to are gonna be that's gonna be the number of secondaries you have to write. So for me, I only ended up applying to like 6 schools total. So what happened was I started with about like 13 that I had on my primary list, and then I got into my secondaries, realized there was no way I was gonna be able to fill out 13 secondary applications, because I started getting my secondaries like right before the school year started in August. So I was really crunched for time. School was starting back up. I was running out of room in my schedule to actually allot time to writing these essays. So I had to be very particular about which secondaries I actually submitted. So I really had to sit down and think, okay, which of these schools could I realistically go to? And for me, I ended up with 6 out of that 13 that I thought I would feasibly attend. So those were the 6 secondaries I filled out. Okay, so this last tip really has more to do with your mental health than anything else, and that is please, please, please do not stress yourself out by comparing yourself to all the other applicants in your cycle, okay? Now, it is one thing to be aware of like the average stats for a certain school you want to go to. Like I said earlier, researching what type of MCAT scores they accept, what type of GPA and extracurriculars they accept. Like that is totally good. But that is not the same thing as like obsessing over this other person you know who's applying who has like 3 years of volunteer experience, or like someone else you heard has like 4 semesters of research behind them. Like, you're gonna have way too much to worry about to be concerned with what everybody else is doing and trying to measure up to everyone else. So take good advice from other students who have like applied before you. Look at, blogs online and any information you can get your hands on. Like, definitely do your research. But beyond that, just don't worry about it. Like, everybody is going to have parts of their application that stand out, including you. So maybe you don't have 300 hours of volunteer experience, but like, you've done this other really cool thing and it impacted you in a really awesome way, and that'll give you something to talk about in interviews, and so it's gonna be fine. Just don't worry about it, okay? Seriously, just take a deep breath. It's going to be fine, okay? There's no such thing as a perfect applicant. You just have to hone in on the things that make you unique. That's all you gotta do. Okay, those were my top 5 tips for getting into med school. Again, this is solely based on my personal experience and opinions. This is not a foolproof guide for getting into medical school or anything like that. My whole purpose here is just to hopefully encourage you, shed a little bit of light on the application process overall, and maybe just make you feel less alone. I didn't have very many friends who were pre-med who could go through this process with me, so I just kind of ended up feeling very alone and lost at certain times, and I do not want you to feel that way. I want you to feel very encouraged and hopeful. I want you to believe in yourself. You can definitely do this. I have faith in you. I will be here hoping and praying for you. Feel free to ask me any questions about any part of the process that you want, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.